The chair shattered before I even realized I'd lost my grip. A loud crack echoed through the garden as the leg gave way, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the hydrangeas. My hands were covered in dirt, my breath sharp with frustration. "Damn thing," I muttered, brushing off the soil from my jeans. "Need some help?" The voice came from the side door, startling me so much I dropped the chair again. I turned to see Liam standing there, barefoot, his hands shoved into the pockets of his khaki shorts. His messy blonde hair looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks, and his green eyes carried an intensity one wasn't ready for. "Oh, it's fine," I stammered, my voice tight. "Just an old chair. It's been falling apart for years." But Liam didn't move away. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze steady as he surveyed the scene. "Doesn't look fine," he said, crouching beside the broken piece of furniture. "Looks like it needs more than glue. Do you have tools?" His quiet confidence threw me off. I had tools, I think, but the thought of inviting him into the basement felt unsettling. "I can handle it," I insisted, trying to wave him off. "Mary," he said with a faint smile, his tone disarming. "Let me help." It had been years since anyone had spoken my name with that much care, like I was someone worth listening to. I swallowed my hesitation.
Fine.
"Follow me." The basement was a mess. It always had been, but after Michael passed, I never found the energy to sort through his things. Dust hung in the air, and the musty smell of mildew lingered in every corner. I flicked on the single bulb, its yellow light flickering above us. "Wow," Liam said, his voice breaking the silence. He pulled an old toolbox from the shelf and popped it open with ease. "This is vintage. Bet you could sell it for a fortune." "It's just junk," I said quickly, feeling self-conscious as he sorted through Michael's tools like they were treasures. "Nah," Liam replied, pulling out a screwdriver and a handful of screws. "Junk's only junk if you don't know what to do with it." For the next 20 minutes, we worked side by side. The basement was stuffy, the air thick with heat, but Liam didn't seem to notice. He tightened screws, adjusted bolts, and even fixed a loose rung I hadn't seen. His hands moved with a steady precision that felt foreign in my disorganized world. "You've done this before," I remarked, trying to keep my voice steady as our hands brushed when he reached for the chair. Liam glanced up, his green eyes meeting mine for a moment too long. "My dad taught me when I was a kid. Before things got complicated." I didn't press. Everyone had their stories, and something told me Liam's wasn't one he shared lightly. Instead, I focused on the chair, pretending not to notice the way my pulse quickened every time he shifted closer. "There," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "Good as new." "Thank you," I murmured, my voice quieter than I intended. Liam stood, wiping his hands on his shorts. "No problem." But he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the workbench, his gaze thoughtful. "You've lived here alone since he passed?" I flinched at the question. "It's been 2 years," I replied. "Michael wasn't around much toward the end anyway. Work took all his time." Liam nodded, but his expression darkened.
"Sounds familiar."
Silence stretched between us, heavy and awkward. I reached for the chair, my hands trembling, and tried to move it toward the stairs. "Here," Liam said, stepping forward. "Let me." He took the chair from my hands, his movements deliberate. For a second, his arm brushed mine, and I froze. The air between us felt different, charged. I broke the silence first. "Dinner's in an hour. You're welcome to join." Liam nodded, his gaze lingering a second too long before he disappeared up the stairs. I stood there for a while, staring at the broken leg he'd repaired, my thoughts spinning. That night, as I washed dishes, I caught him watching me from across the room. His presence filled the house in a way that made me uneasy and alive all at once. His sharp features softened in the glow of the kitchen light, and for the first time in years, I felt something stir, a sense of being noticed, seen. But that wasn't possible, was it? The screech of rusty nails being pulled from wood cut through the humid air. Liam knelt by the old wooden fence, his forearms flexing as he pried out yet another bent nail. Sweat glistened on his brow, and his sandy blonde hair stuck to his forehead in messy strands. "This thing's been holding on by sheer stubbornness," he muttered, yanking the plank free. I stood nearby, awkwardly holding a handful of replacement boards. "Michael always said he'd fix it," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "But he never got around to it." Liam shot me a quick glance, his green eyes sharp but kind. "Sounds like he left you with a lot to take care of." There it was, that quiet intensity in his voice again. I looked away, focusing on the boards in my hands. "It's fine. I'm used to it." But Liam wasn't one to let things drop. "You shouldn't have to be," he said simply, driving a nail into the fresh wood with a quick, practiced swing of the hammer. The impact sent a sharp crack into the air, making me flinch. I watched him work, the steady rhythm of his movements somehow both soothing and disarming. My heart was beating faster than it should have been, and I told myself it was just the summer heat. By the time the fence was standing tall again, dusk had settled over the garden. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle. Liam wiped his hands on his shorts and gave me a small smile.
"There.
"Good as new." I smiled back, though my chest felt tight. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." He didn't respond immediately, just leaned against the fence, his eyes scanning the fading horizon. "You know, I don't mind sticking around for a while. Feels good to do something real for once." His words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I nodded, unsure of what to say. That night, dinner was quieter than usual, at least at first. Liam sat across from me, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp as he speared a piece of roasted chicken. "You've been here a long time," he said suddenly. "This house, it must hold a lot of memories." I set down my fork, taken aback by the directness of his question. "It does," I said slowly. "Some good, some less so." Liam tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What about you? Before all this, what did you want?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to answer, but found myself at a loss. What did I want? I hadn't thought about that in years. "I guess I just wanted peace," I said finally. "A simple life, you know? A family, a home." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And did you get it?" I hesitated, the weight of his gaze pressing on me. "I thought I did," I admitted. "But sometimes, what you think you want isn't what you really need." Liam didn't respond immediately, just watched me in that quiet, intense way of his. The silence between us felt like it was filled with more than words could carry. Later that evening, I climbed into the attic, hoping to escape the strange tension that seemed to follow me. The space smelled of dust and old wood, and the light filtering through the tiny window gave the room a golden haze. I pulled out a box labeled photos and began sifting through faded snapshots of vacations, birthdays, and holidays long gone. "Need a hand?" Liam's voice startled me, and I nearly dropped the box. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his shirt sticking to his chest from the summer heat. His hair was damp, and he looked almost boyish in the soft light. "You scared me," I said, clutching the box to my chest. "Sorry," he said, stepping inside. "I heard you moving around up here. Thought you might need help." Before I could protest, he was beside me, lifting a heavy chest as if it weighed nothing. We worked side by side in the quiet, the only sound the creak of the floorboards and the occasional rustle of paper. At one point, I held up a photo of myself in my 20s, bright-eyed and carefree, standing on a beach with the wind whipping through my hair. "Wow," Liam said softly, leaning closer to examine the picture. "You were beautiful." His words sent a jolt through me, and I quickly set the photo down, pretending to be preoccupied with another box. "That was a long time ago," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Doesn't matter," he replied, his tone quiet but firm. "Some things don't fade." The air in the attic grew heavy, and I felt a warmth creep up my neck. I risked a glance at him and saw something in his eyes I couldn't quite name, something raw and unspoken. "Liam," I began, but my voice caught in my throat. "Yeah?" he asked, his gaze never leaving mine. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Nothing. It's getting late. We should head down." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something, but eventually nodded.
Yeah.
"Okay." As we descended the narrow stairs, the space between us felt smaller, the tension heavier. I told myself it was nothing, just the summer heat playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. The rain came fast, pounding against the windows and drowning the house in a steady drumbeat. The storm had rolled in unexpectedly, sending me rushing outside to gather cushions from the patio before they were soaked. I barely made it back inside when I slipped on the slick floor by the door, landing awkwardly. "Mary!" Liam's voice rang out from the living room. Before I could even process what had happened, he was there, pulling me up with surprising ease. "I'm fine," I said quickly, brushing off his concern, even though my ankle throbbed. "You don't look fine." He crouched down, gently lifting my leg to check. His hands were steady, but the touch made my breath hitch. "You should sit down. Let me get you some ice." "I'll manage," I protested, but he was already heading to the kitchen. The rain battered the house as I limped to the couch, irritated more at myself than at the situation. Liam returned moments later with an ice pack and a towel, his expression equal parts concerned and determined. "Stay still," he said, kneeling beside me. "I've got this." I wanted to argue, to insist I didn't need help, but his focus left no room for debate. He carefully wrapped the towel around my ankle, his fingers brushing my skin with a tenderness that made my heart race. "See," he said, sitting back with a faint smile. "Not so bad." "Thank you," I murmured, looking away. I couldn't handle the weight of his gaze. To break the tension, I pointed toward the hallway. "Since we're stuck inside, maybe we should tackle the storage closet. I've been meaning to sort through Michael's old things for months." Liam hesitated, but then nodded.
Sure.
"Let's do it." The storage closet was a time capsule. Old boxes were stacked to the ceiling, filled with everything from photo albums to forgotten tools. The air smelled of dust and memories, and the dim light overhead flickered slightly. "This is going to take forever," Liam joked, pulling down a box labeled winter clothes. "That's why I've been avoiding it," I replied, prying open a box of mismatched kitchen gadgets. "Half of this stuff is junk." We worked in silence for a while, the rain continuing its relentless symphony outside. Liam opened another box, this one full of old books, and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "It's Michael's," I said, taking it from him. "He used to write down notes for projects he wanted to do around the house." Liam looked at me, his expression soft. He seemed like a good guy. I nodded, setting the journal aside.
He was.
But he was always distracted, always planning for tomorrow. I guess I didn't realize how much I wanted someone to focus on today. The words hung between us, heavier than I intended. Liam didn't respond, just reached for another box. "Careful," I warned. "That one's..." Too late. The box tipped, sending its contents spilling onto the floor. Books, papers, and framed photos scattered everywhere. I bent down to help, but Liam beat me to it, his movements quick and precise. Our hands collided as we both reached for the same photograph. I froze. "Sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "It's fine," I replied, but neither of us moved. His hand lingered over mine, warm and steady, and I couldn't bring myself to pull away. "Mary," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, meeting his eyes. The storm outside felt distant, the world shrinking to just the two of us in that cramped, dusty room. His gaze was intense, searching, and I knew I should look away, but I couldn't. Before I realized what was happening, Liam leaned closer. My breath caught as his lips brushed mine, soft, tentative, as though he was giving me every chance to pull back. But I didn't. For a moment, I let myself fall into the warmth of the kiss, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against mine. It wasn't just the kiss, it was the way he made me feel.
Seen.
Wanted.
Alive.
Then reality crashed down around me. I pulled back sharply, my hand flying to my mouth. "Liam, we can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. His expression was unreadable, a mix of regret and something else I didn't dare name. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, stepping back. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," I interrupted, my heart pounding. Let's finish this." But the moment was already shattered. We worked in strained silence, avoiding each other's eyes. When the boxes were finally packed away, Liam muttered something about needing air and disappeared into the rain. I stayed behind, staring at the half-sorted piles and the photograph still clutched in my hand. It was a picture of Michael and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so hopeful. But as I stared at it, all I could think about was Liam, his touch, his kiss, the way he made the emptiness inside me feel a little less hollow. I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The clatter of dishes filled the quiet house as I set the table, my hands moving quicker than they should have. Every time I reached for a plate or adjusted a fork, I could feel his eyes on me. Across the room, Liam leaned against the counter, sipping a glass of water like he didn't have a care in the world. But his gaze was anything but casual. I tried to focus on the mundane details, folding napkins, checking the roast in the oven, but the weight of his attention made it impossible to think straight. My heart raced every time I turned around, afraid of catching his eyes again. "Dinner's almost ready," I said, my voice higher than usual. Liam didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost teasing. "You're moving a little fast there, Mary. Need some help?" "I've got it," I replied quickly, not daring to look at him. But he didn't move away. Instead, I heard the soft creak of the floorboards as he stepped closer, his presence filling the small kitchen like a storm cloud. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone edged with something I couldn't name. I turned sharply, clutching a dish towel like it was a lifeline. "Liam, please, just sit down." For a moment, he didn't move. His green eyes locked onto mine, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. Then he shrugged and stepped back, settling into one of the chairs at the dining table. The rest of the meal was a blur. I couldn't tell you what we ate or how long we sat there. Every time I glanced up, Liam was watching me, his gaze steady and unrelenting. I tried to focus on small talk, on asking him about his plans, but the words felt hollow. By the time we finished, the tension in the room was unbearable. I stood to clear the plates, desperate for something, anything, to break the spell. "I'll help," Liam said, standing so suddenly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "No, it's fine," I said quickly, grabbing the dishes. He ignored me, following me into the kitchen with a stack of plates in his hands. The air between us felt electric, the silence heavy with everything we weren't saying. I turned on the sink and began scrubbing furiously, hoping the noise of the water would drown out the sound of my racing heartbeat. But then I felt him behind me, close, too close. "Mary," he said softly, his voice cutting through the noise. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, him or myself. "Why not?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I could feel the heat of him, the steady rhythm of his breath. "Why are we pretending this isn't happening?" I turned around, the words rushing out before I could stop them. "Because it's wrong, Liam. Whatever this is, it can't happen." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd back off. But then he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine where it rested on the counter. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you don't want this, and I'll stop." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I couldn't deny it, not to him, not to myself. The space between us felt like it was on fire, and I was already burning. Before I could think, he reached up, his fingers trailing along my jawline. It was such a small, gentle gesture, but it broke something inside me. I leaned into him, my resolve crumbling as his lips met mine. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, like we were both testing the waters. But it didn't stay that way. It deepened quickly, the weight of weeks, maybe years, of loneliness pouring out all at once. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer as I clung to him, forgetting everything else. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. "Liam, we can't," I began, my voice trembling. "I know," he said, but his grip on me didn't loosen. "But it doesn't feel wrong. Not when I'm with you." The words hit me harder than they should have, and for a second, I let myself believe him. But then reality came crashing back. I pushed him away, my hands trembling. "You need to go," I said, my voice barely audible. He hesitated, his green eyes searching mine for something, anything, that might make me change my mind. But I couldn't give it to him. "Please," I said, taking a step back. "Go." Liam nodded slowly, his jaw clenched as he grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair. He paused in the doorway, his hand gripping the frame. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice steady. When he finally walked out, I collapsed against the counter, my chest heaving with the weight of what had just happened. The kitchen felt too quiet, too empty, and I was left alone with my guilt and the undeniable truth. I didn't want it to be over. The first week after that night felt like walking through a storm, every step unsure, every moment heavy with tension. I tried to lose myself in routines, cleaning the house, tending the garden, but nothing worked. I could feel Liam's presence in every corner of the house, even when he wasn't there. But he was always there. One morning, as I watered the flowers by the porch, the sound of his voice cut through the stillness. "Need some help?" I flinched, the watering can slipping from my hands and splashing water onto my shoes. I turned sharply to see him standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets and an easy grin on his face. "No," I said quickly, bending to pick up the can. "I've got it." He stepped closer anyway, his movements slow, deliberate. "You're terrible at pretending, you know." "Pretending what?" I asked, though my voice was weak. "That nothing happened," he said, his tone quieter now. "That it didn't mean anything." I froze, the watering can forgotten at my feet. "Liam, we said we wouldn't." "We didn't say anything," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "You pushed me away before we could." The tension was unbearable. I turned back to the flowers, pretending to fuss with the soil. "It doesn't matter.
We can't talk about this."
It's over." But he didn't move. "If it's over," he said softly, "then why can't you look at me?" My breath caught, and for a moment, I considered answering. But before I could, a voice called out from across the street. "Good morning, Mary." I looked up to see Mrs. Johnson, the neighborhood busybody, waving from her front porch. She was holding a mug of coffee and squinting suspiciously in our direction. "Good morning," I called back, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I could feel Liam stiffen beside me, his easy confidence slipping for the first time. Mrs. Johnson's gaze flicked between us, her curiosity practically radiating across the street. "Nice to see your guest is helping out," she said, her tone edged with something I didn't like. "Yes," I replied quickly. "He's just visiting. Michael's grandson." Her lips pursed, but she nodded and disappeared back into her house. The second she was gone, I turned to Liam, my voice sharp. "You can't keep hanging around outside like this. People are going to start asking questions." "Let them," he said, his tone defiant. "No, Liam," I snapped, the weight of my fear breaking through. "You don't understand. This isn't a game. If people find out—" "I know," he said, cutting me off. His voice softened, and he stepped closer, his green eyes locking onto mine. I know what's at stake, Mary. But I'm not going to pretend I don't care about you. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and for a moment, I felt like the world around us had stopped. Can we at least talk about it? He asked, his voice quieter now. I hesitated, then nodded.
Fine.
Tonight, when it's safe. That evening, the rain returned, a soft drizzle that blurred the windows and filled the house with a cool dampness. Liam was waiting for me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. You said we'd talk, he reminded me as I entered the room. I closed the door behind me, my hands trembling. What do you want me to say, Liam? That I'm confused? That I don't know how to stop this? His expression softened, and he stepped forward, his voice gentle. Then don't stop it. Liam, I began, but he shook his head, cutting me off. No, listen to me, he said, his voice firm. I've been thinking about this, about us. And maybe the problem isn't what's happening. Maybe the problem is staying here, pretending we can keep living like this. I stared at him, not understanding. What are you saying? I'm saying we leave, he said, his words clear and certain.
Together.
The air seemed to vanish from the room. Leave, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he said, stepping closer. We don't owe this place anything. We could start over somewhere new, somewhere people don't care about gossip or what's right. My heart pounded in my chest. That's crazy, Liam. I can't just leave. This is my home. It's not a home, Mary, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. It's a prison. And you know it. His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. For years, I told myself that this house, this life, was enough. But was it? I can't just abandon everything, I said, though my resolve was slipping. You wouldn't be abandoning anything, he said softly. You'd be choosing yourself for once. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Before I could answer, there was a loud knock at the front door. We both froze, the sound cutting through the charged silence like a knife. Who is it? Liam whispered, his voice tense. I don't know, I said, my heart racing as I moved toward the door. When I opened it, I found Mrs. Johnson standing on the porch, her expression as sharp as ever. Evening, Mary, she said, her tone clipped. I thought I saw your lights on. Mind if I come in for a chat? The house was buzzing with activity, the hum of voices echoing through the dining room as I carried a tray of glasses to the table. Family dinners weren't a regular thing, but tonight was special, a rare gathering of cousins, siblings, and an old family friend, Paul, who hadn't visited in years. Smells amazing, Mary, Paul called from the head of the table, his deep, booming voice filling the room. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still broad-shouldered, with a knack for observing everything without saying too much. Thank you, I replied with a strained smile, my heart pounding as I avoided looking at Liam. He was seated at the far end of the table, his posture relaxed, but I could feel his gaze following me as I moved. I set the tray down carefully, trying to appear unbothered, but the tension was unbearable. Every time I caught sight of Liam, the memory of his words, "Let's leave together," echoed in my mind. Need a hand? Paul asked, rising to grab a plate of roasted vegetables. No, I've got it, I said quickly, but his offer drew attention. The room quieted, and I felt everyone's eyes on me, including Liam's. Liam, pass the water, one of the cousins said, breaking the silence. Liam reached for the pitcher, his movements deliberate, but just as he stood to pour, his elbow caught the edge of his plate. The loud clatter of silverware hitting the floor made everyone jump. Damn it, Liam muttered, crouching down to pick up the mess. It's fine, I said quickly, stepping forward to help. Our hands brushed as we both reached for the same fork, and I froze, the brief contact sending a shiver through me. The room felt suffocatingly quiet. Got it, Liam said, his voice tight. He stood quickly, avoiding my eyes as he straightened the pitcher. Paul's gaze lingered on the two of us, sharp and calculating. "Everything okay down there?" he asked, his tone light but edged with suspicion. "Fine," Liam said, his response too quick, too clipped. Paul didn't say anything else, but his silence felt louder than any question he could have asked. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The usual laughter and easy conversation were replaced by strained small talk and awkward pauses. I kept my focus on serving, clearing plates, and refilling drinks, desperate to appear normal. "You've been quiet tonight, Mary," Paul said suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. "Something on your mind?" "Just busy," I replied, forcing a laugh. Paul nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on me a second too long. "Seems like everyone's a little off tonight." His comment hung in the air, and I caught the briefest glance from Liam, quick, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a jolt of panic through me. "I think the rain's got everyone feeling sluggish," I said quickly, trying to redirect. Paul smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe. Or maybe there's something else going on." "Paul," I began, but he raised a hand, cutting me off. "I'm just saying," he continued, his voice calm but pointed, "it's hard to keep secrets in a house this small." The words hit like a thunderclap. I saw Liam stiffen, his hand tightening around his glass. Across the table, another cousin shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand it. "Secrets?" one of them asked, their tone curious. Paul shrugged, his eyes flicking between me and Liam. "Just an observation." After dinner, I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I scrubbed plates with more force than necessary. The sound of footsteps behind me made me freeze. "Mary," Paul said quietly, stepping into the room. I didn't turn around. "What is it?" "You tell me," he said, his voice low and even. "Something's going on with you and that boy." My breath caught, but I kept my back to him. "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not blind," he continued, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've been on edge all night, and Liam, he's acting like he's got something to hide." I turned to face him, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. "Paul, you don't know what you're talking about." He stepped closer, his expression softening. "Mary, I've known you for years. You're a terrible liar." My chest tightened, and for a moment, I thought I might break. But then Liam appeared in the doorway, his presence instantly shifting the energy in the room. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice steady, but his eyes darting between me and Paul. "Just catching up," Paul said, his tone casual, but his gaze never leaving mine. Liam took a step forward, his posture protective. "Maybe it's time you headed out, Paul." Paul raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I see," he said, his tone laced with implication. "Paul," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, let's not make this into something it's not." But he wasn't listening. He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Liam. "Be careful, kid," he said before turning and walking out. When he was gone, the silence was deafening. Liam stepped closer, his expression dark. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mary," he said, his tone sharp. "It doesn't matter," I said, cutting him off. "What matters is that we're running out of time. If he suspects something, others will, too." Liam's jaw tightened. "Then let's leave," he said, his voice filled with quiet urgency.
"Now."
"Tonight." I stared at him, my heart pounding. I wanted to say yes, to let him pull me out of the storm we'd created. But I couldn't. "We can't," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's too late." The weight of everything hit me all at once. The whispers from the neighbors, the sharp, questioning glances from Paul, and the unspoken tension that lingered in every corner of my house. It was suffocating. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. And the guilt gnawed at me like an endless ache that I couldn't ignore anymore. Days blurred into nights, and I avoided Liam as much as I could. But it didn't matter. His presence filled the spaces we didn't share, his words, "Let's leave together," echoing in my mind every time I closed my eyes. By the time I worked up the courage to face him, the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. I found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the horizon. He didn't look at me when I stepped outside, but I could feel the tension in his posture. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely audible. "I figured," he replied, his tone calm but distant. I sat down beside him, keeping my hands folded tightly in my lap. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said. "Liam," I began, my throat tight. Whatever this is, it has to end." He turned to me then, his green eyes searching mine.
Why?
"Because people are starting to notice? Because you're scared? Because it's wrong," I said, my voice breaking. "And it's destroying me." His jaw tightened, and he looked away, staring out at the fading light. "It doesn't feel wrong to me," he said quietly. "But I get it. You've made up your mind." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced them back. "Liam, you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Staying here, staying with me, it'll only hold you back." "You think I care about that?" he snapped, his voice rising for the first time. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "You're the only thing that's felt real to me in years, Mary. And now you're telling me to just walk away like it didn't mean anything?" I stood too, my chest tightening. "I'm not saying it didn't mean anything," I said, my voice trembling. "But sometimes the right thing and the hardest thing are the same." For a long moment, he just stared at me, his expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. Then he nodded, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're right," he said. "It's time to let go." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to argue, to say something that might make him stay, but no words came. Liam stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I'll always care about you, Mary. But you deserve to figure out who you are without me. And I need to do the same." The finality in his tone shattered something inside me. I reached out instinctively, grabbing his hand. "Liam." He leaned in, brushing a gentle kiss against my forehead. "You'll be okay," he whispered. And then he was gone, walking away down the garden path as the last light of day faded into darkness. I watched him until he disappeared, my heart breaking with every step he took. The house felt emptier than it ever had that night. The silence was deafening, and I spent hours sitting in the dark, replaying everything over and over. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. The whispers faded, the sharp glances dulled, and the world moved on. And slowly, so did I. I threw myself into the things I'd neglected for years: volunteer work, tending to the garden, reconnecting with old friends. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. It wasn't easy. The guilt and loss lingered, and there were nights when the memories of Liam would creep in, leaving me breathless and aching. But those moments grew fewer, and with time, I began to see the truth. I was stronger than I thought. One evening, months later, I stood on the back porch, watching the sun set over the garden. The colors reminded me of that final moment with Liam, and though it still hurt, there was peace in the memory. For years, I'd been waiting for someone to save me, Michael, Liam, anyone. But now I understood that the only person who could do that was me. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready.